Welcome back, film friends. It's Andrew from the Revisionist Almanac, and it's time to get into the second part of this three-part special where I count down my top 50 favorite action movies of all time. If you haven't listened to part one, be sure to hit pause on this. Go back and listen to everything that was on the list at numbers 50 through 31, and then come back to this right afterwards. Since part one was recorded, I got some additional feedback from the online community on your favorite action movies and wanted to share some of that now. Friend of the show and past guest, Tom Duncan, from the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, said the two action movies that came to mind for him were The Bourne Ultimatum and Casino Royale. Now, I have already had two Bond movies on my list, and though none of the Bourne movies made my top 50, they are all very strong action movie entries. Thanks to Tom for sending this over. I also got some information from our friend and also past guest Joey R. of Best Picture Cast and 1001 by 1. Joey said, "Is The Great Escape making your list? Because it's a great action movie that should be an all-time movie if Steve McQueen didn't want to be too cool." Joey, I think you're 100% correct. I believe The Great Escape is an excellent movie that does get overshadowed by Steve McQueen trying a little too hard to be cool. And because of the problems I have with McQueen in the movie, The Great Escape will not be on this list. Thanks to Tom, Joey, and everybody that has sent feedback in so far, as well as everybody that has already listened to part one, which had the most week one downloads of any piece of bonus content I've released outside of the normal monthly episodes. Let's hop right back into the countdown. At number 30 is one of my go-to action comedies. It's 1984's Beverly Hills Cop. There was almost nothing like the level of superstardom that Eddie Murphy reached in the 1980s between his work on Saturday Night Live, his stand-up comedy specials, and his eventual run of movie classics. Eddie Murphy's Axel Foley character was perfectly suited to the comedian, and this movie also boasts some great role players around him, such as Judge Reinhold, Bronson Pinchot, and Jonathan Banks, just to name a few. At number 29, this could be a controversial pick because I suspect most people will have other movies in the franchise ranked higher, but the one and only time Ethan Hunt will appear on my list is 1997's Mission Impossible. Yes, I am aware that the original Brian De Palma film is much more about the espionage and the story, as opposed to the recent films like Fallout, Ghost Protocol, and Dead Reckoning, which feature far more action set pieces. But I do believe there's enough iconic stuff from this version that is ultimately what helps it make my list. It also doesn't hurt that it has an all-time great director pulling the strings, and the story knows exactly when to turn up the intensity levels at the right time for maximum effect. At number 28 is a movie that smashed together car action into a post-apocalyptic setting. It's 1981's Mad Max 2. Now, the original Mad Max in 1979 is a very good film, but I also look at it as more of a proof of concept for what George Miller was looking to create, and then The Road Warrior ended up being the final product. The movie Road Warrior has awesome action, especially by early 1980s standards, some hilarious BDSM-like costuming, and a cool as can be Mel Gibson playing the legendary anti-hero. At number 27, much like Mission Impossible, I understand there might be some listeners that think other movies in this series offer more outright action, but when I think of John Rambo, I only think about the original 1982 film, First Blood. First Blood is both an awesome action movie and a scathing look at the way America treated some of its veterans that were returning from war in Vietnam. Now, by 1982, Sylvester Stallone was already well known for playing Rocky Balboa, but it was the character of John Rambo that blasted him into the upper echelon of action greatness right alongside Arnold Schwarzenegger. This movie also had a terrific asshole antagonist, played by Brian Dennehy, that I love to go back and root against every time I rewatch the movie. At number 26, while Avengers Endgame featured on the previous episode, my vote for the best MCU action film is Ryan Coogler's breath of fresh air into the superhero world. It's 2018's Black Panther. It's hard to fully quantify the cultural impact this movie had in 2018. The movie grossed over $1.3 billion, and it proved that you could put a black superhero front and center and be a massive financial success. Ryan Coogler built the world of Wakanda through beautiful colors, great characters, including the late Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa, and Michael B. Jordan as the tremendous Killmonger. And it also has one of the great soundtracks of all time, which was produced by rap great and recent Drake destroyer, Kendrick Lamar. Now, Chadwick's untimely death left a gaping hole in the MCU, but because of the spirit of the movie that lives inside so many, we will all have Wakanda forever. At number 25, we're about to enter the danger zone. So take off your shirt, high five a friend, and let's celebrate 1986's Top Gun. Let me first get something off my chest to begin with. Top Gun Maverick has nothing on Tony Scott's 1980s original. Nothing. While everyone still seems weirdly enamored with the more recent movie, I think it's an overrated and unnecessary sequel that doesn't do anything to improve upon the original, other than having better technology to film scenes inside the actual fighter jets. Other than that, the original Top Gun is superior in every single way to me. It has great music, it has Val Kilmer and Tom Cruise at their 80s coolest, and a wealth of supporting actors like Michael Ironside, Kelly McGillis, and Tom Skerritt. Nearly 40 years after this movie has released, I still haven't lost that loving feeling for this one. At number 24, Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers showed up in the first episode of this series, but it's another film of his that I think is his best in the action genre. I'm talking about 1987's RoboCop. For starters, I saw this movie way too early in life, and as a kid, it scared the shit out of me. Seeing Peter Weller get killed at the start of the film had a deep effect on me. Just like he did with Starship Troopers in the 90s, Paul Verhoeven took the renegade approach to filmmaking and layered his action with thematic weight that has stood the test of time. Now, they have made countless sequels, remakes, TV shows, video games, and more out of this franchise, but there is not a damn thing that's been made to equal the impact of the original Robocop. At number 23, crack open your freezer and pull out a Cornetto ice cream. We are going to soak in the action fun of Edgar Wright's 2007 movie, Hot Fuzz. Now, not all British humor is my speed. I'm really only 50-50 on Monty Python, as an example. But Edgar Wright's sensibilities are very much in line with my own. Wright, Simon Pegg, and Nick Frost delivered a three-film Cornetto trilogy that gave us an all-time great zombie movie in Shaun of the Dead, a fascinating alien invasion story in The World's End, and then this ode to action movies. Now, Edgar Wright is a seasoned cinephile and has the ability to both spoof a film genre while also adding something new to it, which is what makes Hot Fuzz so great to me. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost are front and center as the two buddy cops, but Wright also brings the likes of Olivia Colman, Bill Nighy, Timothy freaking Dalton, Patty Considine, and Jim Broadbent to round out a terrific cast. At number 22, sorry for those of you that either don't speak Spanish or don't get this reference, but vaya con Dios as we ride the waves of action for this next pick. We are up to 1991's Point Break, directed by Academy Award winner Catherine Bigelow. I would like to throw my hat in the ring for Patrick Swayze's Bodhi in Point Break as one of the coolest characters ever put to film. Keanu Reeves also plays a former college football player, Johnny Utah, who is now a member of the FBI, and alongside his partner, played by the madman Gary Busey, as they look to infiltrate a gang of bank robbers and take them down. Along the way, they surf. They nearly get their faces ripped to shreds by a lawnmower, and they do some skydiving just to pass the time. You either accept Point Break as one of the best action movies ever made, or you're wrong. There is really no middle ground here on this one for me. At number 21, back-to-back movies with terrific bank heists. Well, for me, the action is the juice when it comes to this movie. And even at nearly 3 hours in runtime, I think Michael Mann's Heat from 1995 features some of the best action of the entire decade. Al Pacino and Robert De Niro together in a movie was like bringing together Captain America and Iron Man in the 1990s. Two superhero actors coming together to craft a cat and mouse game for the ages. When it comes to this movie, it's really all about the climactic bank robbery, which I'll lay claim to as the single greatest of its kind. This movie boasts heart-pounding sound design, a thrilling story, and I can only hope that the sequel Michael Mann is currently cooking up comes close to the level of the original Heat. At number 20, I'm going to bend the definition of an action movie just a little with this pick, but please stay with me for a moment and hear me out. let's talk about Park Chan-wook's 2003 revenge thriller, Old Boy. Now, it's not a traditional action movie, but the now legendary hallway fight scene alone warrants this landing on the list for me. Choi Min-sik plays the central character who is mysteriously imprisoned for 15 years before being released and having to uncover what happened, why, and go after those responsible. Though many people know the twists that Chan-wook unleashed on the audience, I'm not going to spoil it here for anyone that's listening and hasn't seen the film in all its glory. Just make sure you don't accidentally try and watch the abomination that was Spike Lee's ill-fated American remake in 2013. At number 19, of all 50 movies on the list, this might just be the one that has the highest action per minute ratio of them all. It's Gareth Evans' instant cult classic, 2011's The Raid: Redemption. The story is simple. A police officer has to fight his way to the top of an apartment building and bring down a crime lord. From there, it's just 100 minutes of nonstop, full throttle, hand to hand combat action. Now, some might find the amount of violence on display to be redundant or taxing at a certain point, but I think this movie knows exactly what it is, who it's targeting as an audience, and gives the maximum effort to please that crowd. At number 18, while some of the action movies on this list have been well received by the critics and even won Academy Awards for their work, this is the first and only choice that is an actual Best Picture winner. We are going back to ancient Rome and talking about Ridley Scott's epic Gladiator from 2000. Russell Crowe is Maximus, a Roman general who ends up being enslaved after the emperor is murdered, along with Maximus's whole family. He must battle insurmountable odds in front of a voracious crowd of spectators to prove his worth and find the right moment to exact his revenge on the evil Commodus, the culprit of the previously mentioned murders, played diabolically by Joaquin Phoenix. Now, because this movie is so highly regarded both by myself and people in the film community, the hype meter for the sequel that comes out later this year in 2024 is off the charts right now. At number 17, this year marks the 20th anniversary of what is still considered by most to be one of the defining films of the entire superhero genre. We're talking about Sam Raimi's ultra successful second film in his Spider Man trilogy, Spider Man 2. Yes, I will accept that Tom Holland is probably the best on screen version of Peter Parker, but Tobey Maguire will always be the number one Spider Man in my heart. Long before the world dreamed of superhero movies being the most bankable thing in Hollywood, Sam Raimi created a trilogy of movies that proved there was a desire for this type of film by both the loyal comic book fans and the general audience. Spider Man 2 is unquestionably the best of the three in the trilogy, with a deep, emotional story and a terrific villain, Dr. Octopus, played by Alfred Molina. And while I have your attention, I want to say I'm glad to see there is a renaissance of Spider Man 3, which, while deeply flawed in certain areas, is still a massively enjoyable experience, and I think more original than 90% of the superhero fare being made today. At number 16, there really aren't any war movies on this list, mainly because I consider most of those movies to be in their own genre and not technically action films. That didn't stop me from putting this war movie on the list, though, and it's probably not the one you're thinking of. Because I'm the dude willing to upset the dude that doesn't respect the dudes who made this amazing action comedy. It's 2005's Tropic Thunder. This was one of the great movie experiences I can remember in terms of having no expectations going in and nearly rolling on the floor in laughter because it was so damn funny. Ben Stiller wrote, directed, and starred in this outlandish comedy about a group of actors trying to make a war movie through a version of extreme method acting, only to find themselves caught up in an actual conflict. Stiller is great, as always. Jack Black is insane as a heroin addict. An unrecognizable Tom Cruise delivers an iconic and profane performance, and Robert Downey Jr. played an Australian actor playing an African American actor and making a mockery of the levels some actors go for their roles. There has been a lot of discourse over the last 12 ish months about movies like this not being able to be made again in an overly PC world, but I personally disagree. I think this movie would work just as well if it came out today as it did almost 20 years ago. At number 15, let's talk about a movie so phenomenally awesome that it managed to survive the studio trying to change the title of the movie once it hit DVD. Whether you refer to it as Live, Die, Repeat or Edge of Tomorrow, there's no denying this Doug Liman directed sci fi treat deserves a place on the list. This movie takes the Groundhog Day concept of repeating the same day over and over again, but drops us into a world of an alien invasion and a reluctant hero played by Tom Cruise needing to save the day, but having to restart the day every time he dies. It's got a healthy balance of humor, drama, and action, and gives us a hardened, badass female character played by Emily Blunt that is right up there alongside Sarah Connor from the Terminator franchise. At number 14, I know two Bond movies have already made my list in the first part of this series, Goldfinger, and what I said was the best of the franchise in Skyfall, but I did make an error. This right here is actually the best Bond spy movie, and it just happens to be called Kingsman: The Secret Service. Matthew Vaughn's hyper stylized 2015 movie is the greatest love letter to the spy genre that I can think of. The movie stars Taron Egerton as a young spy who is recruited to a secret British intelligence organization led by the dashing and handsome Colin Firth. On top of that, we get a wonderfully over the top, Bond esque villain played by the always entertaining Samuel L. Jackson. The movie gives plenty of winks and nods to the 007 franchise, but Vaughn also brings such a dynamic and chaotic approach to his directing that the action really distinguishes itself on that front. The epic fight scene inside the church towards the end of the film is the standout scene for me, and though both the sequel and the prequel to this movie failed to deliver in the same way, Kingsman is a movie I go back to regularly simply because of how fun it is. At number 13, there have already been a couple sequels on the list, but this one is very special in both the quality of the movie itself and the way it totally changed tone from the first movie. While Ridley Scott's Alien in 1979 was all about scaring the shit out of audiences, James Cameron took a different but equally satisfying approach with Aliens in 1986. Now, if pressed, I still prefer the original Alien because I'm a horror junkie at heart, but I know Cameron's sequel has an army of fans that find it the best in the franchise, and it's really hard to argue with that sentiment. He has a knack for visual storytelling that few other directors can boast. And while Sigourney Weaver was prominent in the original, it's this film where she emerges as a true star of the franchise and as an action leading lady. And though I am cool on James Cameron's recent work with the Avatar series, you can certainly expect another of his films to appear closer to the top of this list, and I'm sure it's obvious which one I'm talking about. At number 12, it's time to really, really upset some people with a pick, and to that I say yippee-ki-yay. Let's talk about the greatest Christmas movie ever, even if it's not a top 10 action movie for me, 1988's Die Hard. I first want to apologize to friend of the show over on Instagram, Anton Kinilov, who had this listed as his favorite when I asked for online feedback. This is the third and final time a John McTiernan movie shows up on the list, and with him being featured most, perhaps this just makes him the best action director in cinema. Who's to say? It would be impossible for any self respecting lover of action films to not have Die Hard on a list of their favorites, but I do have a reason for its relatively low spot on my list compared to where I suspect most of you rank it. While I think Bruce Willis is a quintessential action movie star, and the villain Hans Gruber, delightfully played by Alan Rickman, is top tier, I think a lot of the actual action of this movie has aged a bit compared to other similar films from the 1980s decade. So get out your pitchforks and come at me if you need to. I'll walk over the broken glass on my bare feet defending my placement of Die Hard at number 12. At number 11, the final movie that just missed out on the top 10. Though if I was rating movies based on the strength of a series as a whole, this might even crack my top 5. It's 2014's John Wick, directed by Chad Stahelski. Before I talk about my love of Keanu Reeves and this movie, I have to share a message from friend of the show Betsy Gorham, who hosts the Never Seen It podcast with her husband Trent. Betsy said, the John Wick series is her favorite in the action genre, and when I pressed her to rank the series, she was more than happy to. I say that in jest because if you've ever listened to Never Seen It, you know she actually hates ranking things. I was able to get an answer from her though, and she said, and I quote, "Oh dang, that's tough because they're all so good. Without having seen them recently, and completely off the cuff, I'd rank them 1, 2, 4, and 3, but they're basically even. and few franchises are as solid across the board. End quote. Amen to that, Betsy. For my money, the John Wick series has set the bar for what an action franchise should be in the 21st century, and the first in this series is still the one I go back to most frequently. While the other three kept increasing the chaos, the stripped down story of the first is absolute perfection for me. It's just about one man, albeit one that's a supreme killing machine, going on a murderous rampage of revenge following the death of his dog. What more could anyone actually ask for in an action movie? Well, I guess since this is only number 11 on my list, there are probably 10 more things I could personally ask for. This now concludes the second part of the series, but I'll be back one final time next week to bring you my top 10 action films ever made. I hope you've had some fun listening to this episode, and while you're here, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, as well as rating and reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. Did you like what was on this list, or do you think I had things placed way too high, too low, or not at all? Be sure to reach out to me on any social media platform at RevAlmanac with your feedback, or you can email the show at revisionistalmanac@yahoo.com. That does it for part 2 of this series. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time.